Welcome. Thank you. I just told everybody who you are. So for your audience, since it's going both places, my name is Aubrey Page, and I am the CEO of the Change Starts Here Collaborative, and we support parents and professionals working with kids with neurodiversity. So I primarily have started out in fetal spectrum disorders, which is the most common form of developmental disabilities affecting 5% of the population. It's like super not talked about because of the shame associated with it, but I want to have more conversations about even small amounts of alcohol causing permanent effects in kids. So we're going to talk today about therapy for parents. And from my perspective, when I'm working with families and I have parents who have kids who have developmental disabilities, and they're constantly advocating for IEP support and advocating for therapies, and maybe their kids are struggling with adjusting to whatever, and so they're having behaviors or symptoms associated with their disability. It can be exhausting, and oftentimes we get stuck in this rut of, oh, she dropped off. She'll come back in a second. Oftentimes we get stuck in this rut. We should. Hi.
All right, there goes.
So I was saying that a lot of times parents that I'm working with are advocating for their kids for a million different things, for therapies or school or whatever. And then maybe their kids are having a hard time adjusting to whatever. And so they have symptoms at home that they are trying to parent. We encourage people to have accommodations at home. But it's exhausting. And a lot of times we do that 24/7 and we don't ever do anything for us. And a big turning point for my parenting journey was when I started getting therapy for myself. I've been in therapy since I was a child, but parenting brings up things that you didn't know you needed to talk about.
Yeah.
And so I had to go back knowing I had all this new stuff that I was uncovering. And me being able to handle that helped me become a better parent. You have a broader scope that, like, you have seen this on a broader scale. So I was wondering, from your professional background, what you see as the benefit for parents going to therapy.
I think, well, so I work a lot, as you know, with adoptive and foster families and parents. And so for a significant portion of those parents, types of trauma brought them to adoption and foster care in the first place. Around 80% of parents who adopt or foster have experienced some sort of infertility, which we know is one of the biggest causes of medical trauma that there is.
Yeah.
And so that's one factor. There's also a factor that sometimes parenting experiences with kids who are discriminated against or treated harshly, or who do things that are unexpected for whatever reason, could be issues of race or disability. We have traumatizing experiences managing their care. And so those are important to deal with and unfold as they happen, or, you know, resentment can build between parents and children, or between parents themselves, or the other helping systems. And it's also important too, because if a parent's not taking time out for themselves to do something that they may need to do, that can also interfere with the parent and the child relationship, because it becomes, I can't go to therapy, or I'm not doing something for myself because everything centers around the child and what they need. And so us parents self-neglecting in order to help a child is not healthy for either of them.
Right.
Because part of what we do is we're modeling healthy behavior for our kids. And if our kids need to go to therapy, then part of enforcing that is modeling that mom or dad is willing to do it too.
Yeah. No, that's such a great point. I like what you said about resentment too, because that's something that, so we're doing this next week, we're doing a Time for Me challenge to focus on self-care. And part of my argument as to why we should do that is because we need to model for our kids that it's appropriate and healthy to take time out for yourself to regroup. I encourage people to teach their kids to reset. So like, we're using coping strategies to come back from big feelings, whatever. And so if we're not doing that ourselves, then we're not setting a great example. So I like how you talk about the resentment, and then the modeling is so important. And I see this a lot. This is in my own home. We're like, no, everybody's going to therapy. If you live in this house, you get to go to therapy. It's so awesome. And then when I get home from therapy, I'll talk about back when I used to leave the house. I'll talk about how like, oh, this is what I talked about today. And like, or like on a general sense, like, oh, I feel really good now that I went. That way they know that this is not something like they're some broken person that has to do this. And so therefore, right. So it's almost othering to them for them to be the only one that goes. So yes, I totally agree. Interestingly, when I was looking for facts on Friday, I was messaging you because I could not find studies encouraging parents to go to therapy.
Right.
Like, I mean, I don't work in research, so I only like use the studies that are available, but that seems to be a huge gap in documenting the benefit of therapy for parents and for their kids. Because what you're describing shows that those parents are then going to be more resilient parents and handling things a lot better. The 80% statistic is very interesting too. I did not know that. We did not come to foster care through infertility, but I did experience childhood trauma. So like, yes. What other, when you're talking to other adoptees, what other benefits are they like? So either they had parents that went to therapy, but I'm assuming by and large they didn't because it's not been a socially normative thing. So when they're describing those experiences and kind of like what's the negative side effect of us choosing not to go to therapy?
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to be a self-aware and conscientious parent about what your motivations are in parenting when someone's not helping you be aware of them. And so you don't ever want your child to be the one who takes it upon themselves to be aware.
Right.
One of the things this is because sometimes people can feel very upset or like they're being blamed when you ask them to go to therapy as a parent. And sometimes their first assumption is, well, you think that I'm the one that's causing my child's problems. And that's not really what we mean. So sometimes I use myself as an example. My adoptive mother tried for almost 10 years to conceive, and then I was adopted. And there's not really any support around that because it was, in the 80s, it's, well, you got a child, so the reason that you were sad is fixed now.
Right.
And then she didn't go to therapy until I reunited when I was 25 years old, and at that point, the grief was too much for her. Right. So after 25 years, but up until that point, it's not.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
The trauma and the grief didn't just go away for 25 years and pop back up. And I during that whole time, it was being managed in part by me. And so I was very aware. And I didn't want her to be sad. And I wanted to be all of the kids that she had wanted to have, but she could only afford to adopt one. And so when you care about your parents, and they're not aware of all the stuff that they're carrying, sometimes you start carrying it too. And that can happen between parents and children in any family. And a parent who's self-aware and working on their stuff can notice what their child's starting to try to carry for them, and they can take that back and say, no, let's connect a different way. But a parent who doesn't realize that that's happening, and that's not just her fault. Nobody ever told her what grief from infertility was. Like, nobody ever validated that for her. She didn't know that I was feeling that way, and and then every time I messed up or I didn't do well, I was very hard on myself or worried about being reabandoned and all this other stuff because I had given myself this job. Yeah. And I don't think it was not something that I had the capacity to articulate to her. Like I couldn't say, I really want to be the child that you couldn't have because I feel sad for you. And so this is all like that's kids. Right. It looked like me throwing a temper tantrum and breaking something. It didn't look. Right. I can't communicate what it is that I'm doing. And so they're different. And I think. Because I had behavioral outbursts and I had emotional issues, that kind of just layers, all these layers it creates in families because she would get calls from my school that I got all these detentions again, or that they wanted to remove me from the school, and all of that is impacting her relationships with the teachers, who some of them were her friends, and just getting a call from a school during the day is like activating now. You're traumatized from it because it's always bad. And so she's having all of that piled on top of the original reason why I'm in her home.
Right.
And so, even if you don't know, going to therapy periodically, just to be more self-aware.
Yeah.
It will never hurt you. I'm a big proponent of people not needing to pathologize themselves so that they always have to have a therapist. Like, I don't think there's always something deep down that people have to find wrong with themselves to go to therapy. Like, if if you don't need it right now, you don't need it.
Yeah.
But it's a checkup. A checkup every once in a while is always good too.
Yeah, I think so the example that you're giving is for grief from infertility, which is something that I see a lot in the foster and adoptive community. That's not my story, but I do definitely see that a lot. And I always encourage people to heal before starting on their foster and adoption journey. And then I experienced childhood trauma, right? So both of those things are like in your face reasons that you may think that you should go to therapy. But oftentimes too, I've talked to other family members, they're like, well, I wasn't abused when I was a child. So like, it doesn't always look like that. It could be like a part of my story is that I moved like every few months for like several years, right? So I had a lot of loss during that period, but that's not like, you wouldn't think of that being a big deal. And so some of it, and then sometimes your siblings handle it different than you, and they're like, well, they're fine. So, and then there's other times where we as parents can have PTSD from violent episodes that happen in our house. And us being able to see that and heal from that will allow us to handle them in the future better. So often families come to me and they're like spinning their wheels because they feel like they're trying everything, but they're emotionally drained. And so they can't try everything.
Yes. One thing that I communicate to schools, I've had, when I worked, I did in-home and in-school evaluations and services. One thing that I would observe a lot, and so I've always made it a point to communicate to teachers, principals, administrators, is you can't call a parent and tell them XYZ bad happened at school and just end the sentence there. It always needs to be followed by, since it's your environment, what you're going to do about it, or what you did do about it, how the child is now, what the plan is going forward. Because when you just call to tell a parent a horrible story with nothing else, or what are you going to do about this, because it's not the parent's environment, because the parent wasn't there to see it for themselves, because there is nothing really at school a parent can do, you are putting them in a position that helplessness is part of what causes PTSD. Yeah. When you make a person feel helpless, but are subjecting them to this stress, you are going to, and then it's every time they get a phone call, and then that parent calls the other parent, usually.
Yes.
Which now the only time my wife calls me at 3 p.m. is when so-and-so has, caused a fuss at school. So they start transferring that trauma, that toxicity, and now they don't want phone calls from each other anymore, because now a phone call from your spouse in the afternoon is activating. And it starts at school, and then it trickles into the family system. And sometimes I can't get teachers to stop doing, and I know teachers they don't have anywhere to put it either, but sometimes you can't get a school to stop doing that. And so the parent's only option is to go and take care of themselves, because now they have PTSD or some sort of toxic stress, and they need to, the solution is to manage their emotions now, because the source of the problem won't stop doing that. So there's all different reasons to take radical care of yourself while parenting.
Well, and what you're describing too is the schools, I don't want to say like 100%, but there a lot of times for us as parents of kids with disabilities, the school can't handle our kids. They don't know how. They have not invested in enough training to understand how, right? And so they're calling us from a place of like desperation. I don't know what to do. And so then the burden is on us to come up with a solution. And we're constantly playing mediator between whoever, and to make sure we're not overburdening them, but we're getting our kid what they want, And so that although is environmental, right? That's not our
Mm-hmm.
kid, but a lot of
Nope.
times we can put the pressure on our kid for not doing the thing that, why would you
Mm-hmm.
do this in class? And it's like, well, because the accommodations were not made like they needed to be. That's the reason.
Right. Right.
But it's the way that the school calls makes it feel very blamey, and then we feel like we have to do that as parents.
Yeah.
But therapy helps you see that in context, and so
Mm-hmm.
I love following you because you like you just did when you were explaining your life experience. You have the like the academic background to be able to explain it with like these beautiful words, and we're like, oh my gosh, like that could be how my kid feels, whereas our kids don't have that luxury like you didn't when you were their age, right?
Yep.
And so I'm hoping that it's having parents kind of reassess how they're addressing certain things in a parenting context or from an adoption perspective. And you being open about your reunification and what that felt like for you, I think are very powerful stories, because we definitely want to support our kids with their biological family attachments. So all of that. Oh, and I also love your constellation thing. I'm very excited. You're putting out a post about that.
Yeah.
Soon. Yes. So adoption and foster care world in the context of adoption, or a constellation versus a triangle. So I'm hoping that people will follow you more for that, follow you on social media. Is there any other way that people should connect with you?
So I'm so excited because me and my bestie and colleague, Stephanie, we started something called Roots Incorporated, and we're trying to get it off the ground, but it needs a lot of work to like launch our vision into the constellation, into the universe. But we just took on 2 interns who needed more virtual to get their hours because of the pandemic. So they'll be helping us a lot. So I haven't talked to Stephanie about my most recent ideas that I got when I was just driving. So sorry, she's listening now. So,
yes.
But we have launched a Patreon. And I am thinking, I had wanted to do one separately for my stuff, but I don't feel like I really need to. So I might, we want to do things where we have like monthly lives and stuff through our Patreon, where we can have like these discussions for adults and also parents coming with their kids, or just parents, like different things like that. So with our interns starting on the 25th, they are going to, they have their own adoption connections, and they are going to help us with that. So hopefully within the next week or 2, I'll share our Patreon link with some of that. The Patreon is about funding how we're going to help guide families through using DNA testing to help build a strong self-regarding identity with children who maybe can't access their biological family members, or who can but they're still missing pieces. So that the Patreon is going to support that, but hopefully people will get some support through. And we're also we're trying to make some adoptee kind of stories on Netflix, like The Queen's Gambit and Anne with an E. We're trying to make those, put out like a guide and discussion around those, so that kids can watch them, because they're not for children, but they could be. Right. If parents just knew what parts to kind of provide guidance, or what parts we can fast forward through, or what parts we need to talk about after we watch them. Those shows really could be watched by children, and who would benefit from that strong character. And so we're working on all this. So that's going to be through just you'll see a lot of it on my Instagram, the Roots Incorporated Instagram, Stephanie's Instagram, and then the link to our Patreon. So that's where I'm focused right now.
That's so much excitement though. And I love, so I run a movie discussion, like a watch party on racial discussions for white people to talk about race in a constructive way. I was a film minor in school, and so I love watching things and having like big discussions about it. Like, so I'm very excited about that idea, even if for now it's for my husband and I, and then we see how we can start presenting that when it's age appropriate. Yes. Okay. So that's very exciting. So everybody follow you in all the places. I'll try to, I will tag you. I may have to go back and edit it. Tag you in the description here, so that people can follow you in both places. And I am very excited for everything that you have going on. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's so great. And now we're going to have to interview you with your film.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yes.
So cool.
Thank thank you so much. I'm sure we'll talk again.
Yes. Have a good evening, whatever time it is. I don't know.
Yeah. Afternoon. Yep. Bye.
Take care.